Hello everyone! One of the first videos I've ever made was called Power Chronomancer vs Benchmarks. In that video I successfully beat all the benchmarks in the game using Power Chronomancer with a special twist. Power Chronomancer used to be the strongest DPS spec, and I used vastly simplified rotations that got more complicated with each step to beat higher and higher benchmarks. So in this video I'm trying to replicate this using condition Virtuoso. In the first tier I'm going to show you how to beat the DPS of boon supports who get around 30k DPS on the golem, just using essentially 4 buttons. It is my dagger 2, my F2 shatter, which I shatter always with 5 blades, and my F1 shatter, which is also always shattered with 5 blades, and finally my dagger 1 auto attack. You can see this rotation is really simple and basically any player can play this, no matter what skill level. And so when you're looking for a build that is really straightforward to play, maybe Condition Virtuoso might be the right build for you. Because as you can see, the skill floor, which is what we call this, when you do a minimum of effort, the skill floor is really low, and we will build upon that in later stages obviously, and it gets more complicated, but you already get very reasonable DPS at minimum effort. One detail you may notice is that I am trying to complete my auto attacks. There are no auto attack chains to speak of here, but I'm still trying not to cancel too many auto hits that are started. But you don't really need to pay attention to that. You will also get 30k DPS if you cancel some auto attacks. And one final thing to note is that this is by no means the perfect build to just be auto attacking. We could make build modifications, but our aim is to build this into a complete build, so we are running with the real thing right away, even though it is suboptimal when just auto-attacking and dagger 2 spamming. Okay, so with the next clip we are beating the really low DPS, but pure DPS classes like Catalyst or Spellbreaker or Scrapper or Reaper, and also the very strong quickness supports like Harbinger and Quickness Firebrand. The only thing we change about our rotation is we are adding a phantasm, namely our Focus 5 skill. You may ask yourself why a condition build is spamming a phantasm that only does power damage. That's a very good question. This is because Condi Virtuoso plays a trait called Sharper Images. Sharper Images says whenever a clone or a phantasm lands a critical strike, it inflicts 1 stack of bleeding for 10 seconds. This phantasm, the Phantasmal Warden, inflicts 12 strikes in a row, so it applies this effect 12 times for 12 total stacks of bleeding. We then have another trait called Phantasmal Blade, which says whenever we cast the phantasm at the end of its attack will throw another blade, which then counts as a blade attack and triggers our other key trait of this build, called Jagged Mind, which says whenever we hit something with a blade attack, we inflict 1 stack of bleeding for 10 seconds again. So with this Phantasmal Warden added into the rotation, we get a skill that does 13 stacks of bleeding and quite a bit of power damage in just one very short skill cast. And this already brings us to 33k DPS, which is already solid, and I sure wish some Catalyst players could also get that kind of DPS with just 5 button presses now. Moving on to the next tier. Now we see a comparison to the burst classes. Now this comparison is a bit unfair because burst classes, they have a lot higher DPS at the start of the fight, and the golem is massively stacked against them. Nevertheless, we'll see how we compare to it. And what we're doing here now is we introduce the core weapon swap loop of the rotation. We do it in a very bad way. I'll explain it later in the next stage. But right now you see we're using 2 phantasms on each weapon set. On the focus set we're using the Phantasmal Warden twice. And then we swap to the sword set where we use the Phantasmal Swords twice. And adding those extra phantasm casts from this Phantasmal Swordsman adds, again, because it attacks 9 times, it adds 9 stacks of bleeding, it adds a lot of power damage, and in the end this is just really good for our DPS. So in the bottom left in the chat you see some DPS numbers popping up. We're already around 35k DPS, and there's actually a trait we're running in the dueling trait line that says below 50% of the golem our power damage becomes a lot higher. So you can always expect the damage number of a Condi Virtuoso to slightly increase towards the end of the fight due to this trait. And we've hit 35k DPS and we'll keep that DPS number now. But still, the rotation now incorporates a very basic weapon swap loop. Earlier I said that this weapon swap loop is not exactly optimal. The problem is that we are waiting way too long on the focus set. Here's how we optimize it. We start on the sword set, sword 5, weapon swap, Phantasmal Warden, and now we use Signet of the Ether, our heal skill. Yes, we have to use our heal skill as part of our damage rotation. The heal skill, when used, will reset all phantasm skills. So this way we can always on the focus set, because focus 5 is a bit stronger than sword 5. This way we can always reset our focus 5 and cast it twice on the focus set, but still be able to weapon swap basically off cooldown. So in the previous rotation, one loop through both weapons took us about 32 or 33 seconds. So we got 4 phantasm casts in 32 or 33 seconds. Now we have considerably sped this one up. Now it takes about 26 seconds to swap to the weapons through the weapon sets. That's because of the Signet of the Ether cooldown, which time gates our rotation. And once you have understood this part of the rotation, that you have to cast your phantasms twice on each weapon set, and on the focus you have to reset it to make that happen, you already get incredible damage, I think. This is really easy to do. I think I'm not demanding too much from anyone to be able to replicate this at a golem, and also to be able to roughly follow the structure in a real fight, and the results are just incredible. You see the kinds of classes we are beating here. These are meta DPS classes like Willbender and Rifle Hollow and Condition Scourge at the top there, and we reached 37k with this very bare-bones rotation. Now we can build on this rotation, and the way we're going to build on is we're going to realize that there's not much left to improve actually. In this step, the only thing we are adding is we're adding a use of our elite skill, 1000 Cuts. 1000 Cuts is a skill that attacks 10 times with blades, so it gives 10 stacks of bleeding, and it has some nice power damage, and it triggers our rune bonus from our runes of the crate, which applies poison, torment, and bleeding. So it is just a pure DPS increase. The good thing about 1000 Cuts is that it has no cast time at all, so we can just abuse this now to get higher DPS numbers. The other way we get higher DPS numbers here is that we actually cleaned up the rotation a bit. We did less mistakes in this run, so you're going to see a lot higher number. And in this iteration of the rotation, we're going to beat essentially what are really strong DPS classes. It's not the highest you can get, but You have Hybrid Weaver here, we have Bladesworn, you have Hybrid Soul Beast, you have all versions of Berserker here. We have also 5 pages Firebrand, but this one, this is not the optimal Golem build, of course. You will see that the 8 pages Firebrand will have a real high benchmark with allies later on. And also you have Power Sword Holo. Yeah. If you have understood this rotation so far, I think you have figured most of the way out, and you got 38,000 DPS. And now it starts getting problematic, I think. Because now we are in a stage, we're adding just Dagger 3 here by the way, we're now at a stage where we hit the highest benchmarks in the game. We have Conditioned Sword Weaver, which is a famously complicated rotation. It's not as bad as Dagger Weaver, but it's still already very complicated. We have Virtuoso, we have Power Chrono, we have Rifle Deadeye, a very specific build that has very strict circumstances when it can be played. And we are destroying all of them just by adding Dagger 3 to our rotation and doing still the same loop. And the problem, as I see it with the balance, is not so much the damage output. I think there could be a very healthy Condition Virtuoso build that does around this kind of DPS 39k. That could be possible, okay? We have a big advantage that we have ranged options. Most of our skills work at range. But if it was just that, I'd say fine, okay? But there's this thing that people often point out in raids. You have to dodge mechanics, right? The boss is attacking you, the boss is threatening you, you have to run away, you have to kite. Okay, you shouldn't do any of those things in organized raids, but you know, when pugging, this happens, right? So Weaver may have high theoretical damage, but it's very squishy. To those people I say, okay, just watch the next clip. I'm showing you that I am not going to dodge at all. Okay? Let's add some arena damage. Moderate arena damage ticks for 1100 DPS against us. This is more damage output that you will ever eat. Like, unless you're getting one-shot by stuff, this is more DPS than any raid boss can output. Unless you're hand-kiting at Deimos, I suppose. While we do the full rotation here and hit 40k DPS with the benchmark rotation. By the way, it is not that easy to do, but I'm just saying that look at the sustain, right? We are healing 1100 health per second. We are not going down here, right? And this allows you to face tank anything that won't kill you on any raid encounter. You have a fully ranged rotation. You don't have to adapt to any mechanic. You can just stand still, stand in the face of the boss, don't care about anything, don't have to dodge. You will not go down state. You have a Sword 4 block, you have F4, a 2-second channel block as well. You have great utility with the focus pull. I think the whole package that Condition Virtuoso brings to the table in terms of DPS and safety in one, and also possible utility, that's just right now at the DPS it does, it is too much. Like, all the classes in this list would not survive this damage. There are some healers that have trouble surviving or healing through this. This is not quite trivial. Like, with a druid heal you would go quite low sometimes in this kind of pulsing damage. Anyway, I hope Arenanet finds a way to separate some of the sustain from the Virtuoso from its damage output to force some maybe difficult trade decisions on us Virtuoso players, where we have to pick and choose between, do we want this 3% lifesteal from one of our traits, or do we want some more damage boost? The easiest way I could think of would be to swap the 3% lifesteal from the Jagged Mind trait, which is right now responsible for most of our bleeding output. The skill does a ridiculous amount of damage. It's like 16k or something. 16k DPS is coming from just this one trait. And it also has the lifesteal baked in. It's a trait we always take. My point of view would be to shift the lifesteal away to the master tier and put it on top of Sharpening Sorrow, which is an expertise trait that we are right now not running. We're running Phantasmal Blade because it's higher DPS. So if you had to pick and choose between the slightly higher DPS of Phantasmal Blade or the slightly lower DPS of Sharpening Sorrow, but then having added sustain, that would be a meaningful build choice, and we could adapt from encounter to encounter if we wanted to, if that was desirable, or we could just adapt to our personal skill level maybe, where you say, okay, I'm not that experienced, I need more health, or I'm very experienced, I can read for maximum damage. That would, to me, be a very healthy choice to make when playing Virtuoso. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.